Last time, I left you with a genuinely unfair question. Team swimmer or team heron when it comes to how Spinosaurus actually hunted? A lot of you picked heron, and it turns out you're going to want to hold on to that instinct, because the animal in this video, standing at roughly the same height as a giraffe with its neck stretched up, and with a wingspan that briefly convinced a whole generation of paleontologists it might be physically impossible for anything to fly this large, also, eventually, got compared to a heron. Herons, it seems, keep showing up as the answer to questions science didn't expect to be asking about giant Cretaceous animals. This one is Quetzalcoatlus northropi, the largest flying animal that has ever been confirmed to exist, and for a solid chunk of the 20th century, its own discoverers weren't entirely sure it should be able to fly at all. The story starts in 1971 in Big Bend National Park, Texas, when a graduate student named Douglas Lawson was surveying the Javelina Formation and came across a fossil that, even in fragments, was obviously enormous. Bones from a wing, unmistakably a pterosaur, one of the flying reptiles that shared the skies with the dinosaurs, but scaled up to a size nobody had documented before. Lawson formally described the animal in 1975, naming it Quetzalcoatlus, after the feathered serpent god of the sky in Aztec mythology, and giving it the species name northropi as a nod to Jack Northrop, the aircraft designer behind some of the earliest tailless flying wing planes, which tells you exactly what kind of comparison was already running through Lawson's head. Here was an animal whose closest conceptual relative wasn't another dinosaur. It was an airplane. And that comparison got more dramatic before it got more accurate. Working from an incomplete skeleton, early extrapolations of Quetzalcoatlus's total wingspan ranged enormously, with some estimates in the years after its discovery pushing as high as 15 to even 21 meters tip to tip, numbers that, if they'd held up, would have put this animal's wings closer to the length of a commercial airliner's than to those of any bird alive today, even after those extreme early guesses got walked back with better material. The more conservative estimates still landed somewhere around 10 to 11 meters, roughly 33 to 36 feet, which remains, comfortably, the largest wingspan of any flying animal confirmed in the fossil record. Standing on the ground, an adult Quetzalcoatlus is estimated to have reached about 2 to 3 meters at the shoulder, but with that long neck raised upright, its head could have topped out at more than 4 meters off the ground, tall enough to look a modern giraffe roughly in the eye, an image that is somehow both completely accurate and completely ridiculous at the same time. Here's the problem that size actually created, and it's not a small one. By the time paleontologists had settled on something close to the modern wingspan estimate, they'd also built up a fairly solid understanding of the physics of powered flight in living animals, mostly from studying birds, and that understanding came with limits. Flapping flight is expensive. It demands an enormous amount of muscle power relative to body weight, and as an animal scales up, its weight increases faster than the amount of usable wing muscle it can practically carry, which is a big part of why the largest flying birds alive today, animals like the Andean condor, sit at a small fraction of Quetzalcoatlus's estimated mass, generally under 15 kilograms, and even they mostly rely on soaring on rising air currents, rather than continuous flapping, to stay aloft for long periods. Quetzalcoatlus, once mass estimates settled in a commonly cited range of roughly 200 to 250 kilograms, was potentially over 10 times heavier than the biggest flying bird alive, which is the kind of gap that makes scientists start double-checking their own math. And for a while, some of them didn't just double-check the math. They started questioning the constants underneath it. In the years after the discovery, a small number of researchers seriously floated the idea that if an animal this size really could fly under modern conditions, maybe modern conditions weren't the conditions it actually flew under. Maybe atmospheric density in the Late Cretaceous was different. Maybe, in the most extreme version of the idea, Earth's gravity itself had measurably weakened since the Mesozoic. It's a genuinely wild hypothesis to see floated in a serious scientific context, and it tells you just how hard this one animal was pushing against the edges of what anyone thought a flying creature could physically be. The eventual resolution didn't come from finding a magic bone that solved everything, or from rewriting physics. It came from realizing that everyone had been quietly assuming Quetzalcoatlus took off the way a bird does, and that assumption was almost certainly wrong. A bird launches into flight using a bipedal running start or a jumping leap powered by its legs alone, building up speed before its wings start doing meaningful work. Pterosaurs, as a group, have a skeleton that tells a very different story about how they moved on the ground in the first place. Fossilized pterosaur trackways, footprints preserved in ancient mud, consistently show four-limbed movement, meaning pterosaurs on the ground walked on all fours, using their folded wings as an additional pair of front limbs, not just as flight surfaces held uselessly out of the way. That detail turned out to be the key to the whole mystery. Paleontologist Michael Habib, working through the biomechanics in detail, proposed that Quetzalcoatlus and its relatives launched into the air using all four limbs at once, in a single explosive, vaulting motion, essentially pole vaulting off its own enormously powerful wing arms, rather than pushing off with its legs alone the way a bird does. Because a pterosaur's flight muscles were anchored to those same forelimbs, this quadrupedal launch could recruit dramatically more usable power in a single burst than a bipedal bird-style launch ever could. Enough, according to the biomechanical modeling, to fling an animal weighing 1/4 of a ton into the air in one motion, without needing a running start at all. The animal wasn't defying the physics of flight. It had simply never been using bird physics to get airborne in the first place. And once researchers stopped measuring it against the wrong comparison, the numbers actually worked. Once you accept that Quetzalcoatlus really could fly, the next obvious question is what it was actually doing up there. And this is where the story takes its heron turn. For a while, one popular idea, especially for its close relatives among the larger pterosaurs, was that these animals fed the way modern skimmers do, flying low over the surface of water with the lower half of the beak slicing through it to snag fish on the move. It's a dramatic image, but the anatomy doesn't really support it for an animal built like Quetzalcoatlus. The skull and neck of large azhdarchids, the broader family Quetzalcoatlus belongs to, are long, comparatively stiff, and built more like a heavy pair of stilt-mounted forceps than like the flexible, shock-absorbing structure you'd want for repeatedly slicing a beak through water at speed. More recent interpretations, echoed by research groups including a widely cited 2021 study, have landed on something closer to a terrestrial hunter, an animal that spent much of its actual feeding time walking on the ground on all four limbs through late Cretaceous floodplains and open habitats, using that long neck and long beak the way a modern heron or stork uses its own, stalking and snatching up small vertebrates, lizards, mammals, even hatchling dinosaurs, wherever it found them. Flight under this picture wasn't the main event. It was the commute, the tool that let an animal this size travel efficiently between hunting grounds or escape danger, while most of its actual day-to-day living happened on foot, on the ground, more stork than seabird. So the finished picture looks something like this. An animal standing eye to eye with a giraffe, folding a wingspan longer than a city bus down into a pair of load-bearing front legs to go stalking across a floodplain on all fours, snapping up whatever small, unlucky animal wandered too close. And then, when it needed to cover real distance, launching itself into the air in a single explosive full-body vault that no bird alive today could ever replicate, because no bird alive today builds its skeleton, or its launch, anything like this. It's not really surprising that the 20th century struggled to believe this animal could get off the ground. What's surprising is that it did, and that the answer was sitting in its shoulder joints the entire time, waiting for someone to stop comparing it to a bird. Sticking with rivers and floodplains, because apparently that's where all the best Cretaceous mysteries were happening. Next time on this channel, we're heading back down to ground level, into the water, for the story of the giant crocodile that grew large enough to make a meal out of the dinosaurs sharing its riverbank, Dinosuchus. Let me know in the comments if you want more pterosaurs in the meantime, and subscribe to ClawCatalog so you're here when we get there.